Hello and welcome to another Rio how-to episode. I'm Simon Gawesworth, the Rio brand manager, and this episode is about how to pick a trout rod, a trout fly rod. And this is more designed for a beginner, so if you know about trout fly rods then perhaps you'll glean something from this, but if you're a beginner and you go into a fly shop to pick a trout fly rod, there's a lot and it can be rather confusing. And so I want to boil it down to a couple of little points, a couple of essential points about the rod. First of all, rods vary in a number of ways. We're going to keep it simple. Rods vary in length and they vary in size or line size or rod size as it's sometimes called. In terms of one-handed rods, a rod can be anything from about 6 foot long to about 11 foot long. That's your general range of rod lengths. And a simple rule of thumb is that the longer your rod is, the further you cast. So that's good to bear in mind. So in places where you want to cast a long way, a longer rod is better than a short rod. The downside with a long rod is if you've got lots of trees and bushes in front and above you and around you, you're going to get stuck. And that's not a good thing to have a long rod.
Long rods are also heavier and a longer lever that works against you. So though you will cast further with a long rod, you will also get more tired more quickly. And one final downside to a long rod is when it comes to landing fish. The longer the rod is, the harder it is to get a fish close to you. More on that later.
So your rod choice, well, let's see what we've got here. I'm going to start off with a little 7'6" 3-weight. And this rod is 7'6" long. It's not going to cast a long distance and it's not designed for that. This is designed for a small river, like a creek. The short length of this is good in small rivers because you're not going to hit the tip of the rod on branches and get it stuck behind you on bushes and stuff like that. So a short rod is very much more required in a smaller river. Plus, you don't need to cast far because it's a small river. So generally speaking, in those smaller rivers, you're looking for rods in that 6 foot, 7 foot, maybe 7'6" length. So that's a 7'6" rod. As I said, rods go up in length. Right? You can get a 7'9", you get an 8 foot, 8'6", 9 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot, and so on and so forth. Probably the best general purpose rod of all is a 9-foot rod. That's your workhorse of rods. And I've got a 9-foot rod here. This is, as I said, just a workhorse. It's a great rod for most rivers, for ponds, for lakes. It's just a good all-round size. And just the best-selling rod in the US and Canada is a 9-foot rod, what's called a 5-weight. So 9 foot's a good starting point as a rod, and probably if you're a novice, generally speaking, that's a good all-round size to start off with.
An exception to this would be when fishing in a drift boat on a river. A more popular rod length for fishing out of drift boats is 8'6", slightly shorter than the 9 foot. This is because you rarely need distance in a drift boat, and the shorter rod length helps get any fish you may catch closer to the boat.
But as I said, if you're going to fish creeks and small rivers, that shorter rod length will be better. But sometimes you need that longer cast. And remember what I said at the beginning, the longer rods tend to give you a longer distance. So when you're on a lake, whether you're on the shore of a lake, when you want to throw a line out as far as you possibly can because the fish are right in the middle of the lake, or if you're in a pontoon or in a boat in the middle of a lake, then you want a longer rod. And my go-to rod for lake fishing is a 10-foot rod. I like that extra length because it gives me more range, and certainly if I'm sitting down in a boat, I'm lower, I'm closer to the water, and so that extra length in the rod helps me get out of cast and carry a bit of line. So that's kind of a nutshell summary of why you would choose different lengths of rod. Choose the rod length based on the obstructions around where you're going to fish. The more obstructions, the shorter it is, and choose your rod length based on the distance you want to cast. The longer you want to cast, the longer that rod will be. Now let's talk about size. And line size or rod size, they kind of interchange. When you have a 3-weight rod, go back to my little 7'6" 3-weight creek rod, what the weight is, this says 3WT, what that means is it matches to a line that is also a 3-weight. Let's just grab this shirt and show you. This is a 3-weight line. It says right there on the label, and this is a 3-weight rod, so that's a perfect balance. And that's what really the rod weight or line weight means. It refers to what size of line you put on it. And what you should know about line size or rod size is that the lower the number, the lighter weight that line is. So a 1-weight, there's zeros and triple zeros, but let's ignore those for simplicity. A 1-weight is the lightest line you can have. And in terms of single-handed rods, you can go up to a 12 weight for big saltwater fish like tarpon. So somewhere between 1 and 12 is the size of the rod and the size of the line that matches with it. And very simply, the lighter the line is, the less distance it goes and the softer it lands. So when I want to fish a small creek, I would choose a line that's really light. I don't need to cast far, I want gentle presentation, and so again, a good creek line and a good creek rod size is a 2 or a 3 weight. All right, so if you're fishing those smaller rivers, get a short rod and get a lighter line size.
The other reason you want a lighter rod in a creek is that the fish tend to be smaller, and the smaller the fish you're targeting, the lighter you want your rod to be. If I was chasing 6-inch brook trout in a creek, I'd pick a rod as light as a 1 weight. But if I was in the same size creek in New Zealand and the trout were 4, 5, 6 pounds, I'd select a more powerful rod. Same length, just a little bit more powerful, even though the creeks might be the same size.
The 5 weight we talked about, the standard kind of go-to 5 weight, 9-foot 5 weight. This is your workhorse one, as I mentioned to you earlier. That is a perfect size for pretty well anything. Fishing the Henry's Fork like here, fishing a lake for generally fishing. If you just want one rod that does everything, 9 foot's a great length, and a 5 weight's probably a great size. And really, in terms of trout rods, you probably don't want to go much beyond a 6 weight. Here's back to my 10-foot 6 weight. And the 6 weight, remember, the bigger the number, the heavier the line, so this will throw a heavier line. The heavier line tends to go further than the light line. So on the lakes, I'm going to use a 6 weight because I want to cast it further. If I'm throwing a very large streamer, a heavy streamer needs a heavy fly line to move it. So a heavy fly line needs a heavier rod. So if you're streamer fishing, you probably want to err towards those 6 weights or possibly even 7 weights if it's really big streamers. So it's quite confusing. I know there's a lot of information there and there's a lot of differences, even though we're just talking about length and rod size and line size. But in summary, short light rods are great for small rivers and small fish. Mid-sizes in that 8'6" to 9' 5 weight, 4 and 5 weight, that's a great all-round size. And then those bigger rods, those 6 and 7 weights, they're better for distance and for big streamers. As I said, there's a lot of information in that. If you're looking for your first trout rod, you might need to watch this a couple of times to digest and gel kind of what I'm talking about. But we get lots of people asking, what size trout rod should I pick? And hence this little video. So hopefully you picked up a couple of nuggets from that. Hopefully you've learned a couple of things. And if you enjoyed this episode, check out the Rio website. There's a whole bunch more how-to episodes on it. Many thanks for watching.